Welcome back, everyone, to part two of chapter six. We're going to discuss empiricism. If you recall, we said epistemology is the study of knowledge and beliefs. Epistemology sometimes leads to what's called skepticism. Skepticism is the idea that we lack knowledge in some fundamental way. That is, if you begin to question the reason why you believe the things you believe in, eventually you may conclude you don't really know a lot. The things you thought you know, you don't know them. In fact, even the simplest things. How do you know you're not dreaming right now? I know you're watching this lecture, but you could go home, you could fall asleep, and you dream you're watching this lecture in the exact same way. How do you know this is not a dream? What if everything doubled in size last night while you were sleeping? Would you know it? See, how do I know you're not in the matrix? Let's see. So if you take this seriously, you begin to question everything you believe in, it leads to doubt. It leads to you becoming really careful about the things you say. Yes, I believe those things are true. And there are three types of knowledge. One is called knowledge by acquaintance. Knowledge by acquaintance. That is, as long as your senses work, you perceive something. That's a kind of knowledge. So if you taste something, you feel something, you hear something, you smell something, you see something, that's a type of knowledge. And newborn babies, that's the type of knowledge that they have because their senses work. Animals also have this type of knowledge. And there's what's called competence knowledge, or knowledge of skills. Performance knowledge is knowing how to do things, not knowing how. If you know how to cook, how to dance, that's a type of knowledge, knowing how to do things. But what we're interested in this class is what's called propositional knowledge. Propositional or descriptive knowledge is knowing that, knowing something is the case. For example, I know the earth goes around the sun. I know that Christopher Columbus came here in 1492. So knowing that is the case. Usually, it seems that human beings seem to be the only ones that have this type of knowledge. Again, the animals, they have knowledge of skills. Birds have to learn how to fly. Birds have to learn how to build a nest and all that. So the animals, they have certain skills. Also, since their senses work, they know the role. But descriptive knowledge requires language, words. So this is why newborn babies don't have this knowledge yet. Sorry. Because they can't speak yet. So it's knowing something is the case, right? There's what's called cognitive realism. Cognitive realism says truth depends on what cultures or someone believe. Truth depends on what persons or cultures believe. This theory is false because, as I said, whether something is true or not, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. If 2 plus 3 is 5, you don't have to believe it. It's true no matter what you think. If water is H2O, even if you don't believe it, it is still true. So you can't make something true by believing it. And you can't make something false because you choose not to believe that thing. For ethics and morality, maybe you could let this slide by because cultures believe different things when it comes to what is right and what is wrong, and people believe different things. But if you're speaking about the natural world, physical objects, reality as it is in itself, then this idea is false. Now let's get to the actual subject of the day. which is empiricism. Empiricism is the belief that our knowledge comes only from the five senses. Knowledge comes only from the five senses. Let's say this morning a baby was born. All the senses of the baby don't work. That is, the baby is born blind, the baby is born deaf, the sense of smell doesn't work, the sense of taste doesn't work, the sense of touch doesn't work. All of them are turned off since day one. This means if the baby touches fire or ice, the baby doesn't feel anything because all the senses are off since day one. We know if you lose one of your senses, let's say you become blind, the other senses tend to get stronger. But let's say all of them are shut down since birth. Now the question is, can this person gain any knowledge? If all the senses are turned off since the day of your birth, would you be able to learn anything? Would you know anything? Would you have ideas in your mind? Try to imagine this for a moment. If you have a baby, the baby is deaf, the baby is blind, sense of smell, touch, they don't work. How will you teach that child? If you speak to him, the baby can hear you. If you use sign language, he can't see you. If you touch him, the baby doesn't feel you. If you yell, scream, the baby can hear you. If you say that's the sun rising, shining, the baby can't see it. So how will you get ideas in the mind of the baby? So will the mind be blank? No ideas, no thoughts? What would someone like that be able to think of? Obviously, they can't think of the trees because they can't see the trees. They can't think of the sun because they can't see the sun. They can't feel the sun. So what will they think of? A few people think, well, they may be able to think of mathematics because when we do math, we use the mind, not the senses. It's not clear because how will you teach them how to count? How will you teach them numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? See? Will they even be conscious? Conscious of what? They can't be conscious of, again, the trees, the forest, the moon, the rivers. They can't be conscious of their parents because they can't see them and smell them and touch them and feel them. Let's see. So it looks like then we learn through the five senses. So this is exactly what Empiricism says. The senses are the foundation of knowledge. When we are born, our minds are blank, like a blank piece of paper. There is no knowledge, no ideas. We are not born knowing anything. It's when the senses begin to interact with the world, that is seeing, tasting, smelling, hearing, touching, feeling. So when the senses begin to interact with the world, then that's when we begin to have ideas in the mind. But at birth, the mind is a tabula rasa. It is like empty piece of paper. There's no ideas in your mind. So ideas then are simply copies of sensations. We have sensations, then our mind makes copies of them. So the difference between an idea and a sensation, sensations are more vivid, they're stronger, they have more colors in them. But ideas, no matter how abstract, sublime they are, even ideas about poetry, about mathematics, about truth and beauty and goodness and God, those ideas, they seem that they don't have anything with the five senses. But Empiricism says, well, everything has to start with the five senses. If your senses don't work, you cannot learn anything, you cannot know anything. Your mind would be blank, just like a piece of paper. Now, one of the consequences of this idea is that, okay, if we know through the senses, then if certain things we can't perceive them, then this means we cannot know them. If knowledge is gained through the senses, if certain things go beyond the senses, we can't know them. For example, we cannot know God exists because we can't sense God. We can't smell, taste, hear, touch God. We cannot know this free will. We cannot know we have souls that can't die. We cannot know if there's an afterlife. So anything that goes beyond the senses, we cannot know them. So you may say, well, this idea must be false because there are things called electrons, atoms, photons, molecules, cells. We can't perceive them. But notice, microscopes that we use to perceive cells, molecules, atoms, they're simply extension of our senses. In fact, most technology that we build, they're actually extension of the five senses. Okay, so this pretty much shows that the senses are limited. So there are things that could be true, but because the senses are not powerful enough, we cannot perceive them. Hence, we build technology to extend our senses. So to summarize this, empiricism says we gain knowledge through the five senses. If the senses don't work, they all turn off. This means you cannot gain knowledge. At birth, the mind is blank. There are no ideas in your mind. You are not born knowing anything. It's when the senses begin to exchange information with the world. You have sensations, then your mind makes copies of sensations, and you have ideas in the mind. Ideas that are abstract, like mathematical ideas, they wouldn't exist still, even though they seem that they have nothing in common with the senses, but fundamentally, the senses are the foundation of knowledge. Now, this raises a question. If we know through the senses, and it's hard to disagree with that, do we see the world the way the world is, or do we see the world the way we are built? If we gain knowledge through the senses, do we perceive the world the way the world is in itself, or do we perceive the world the way our senses are built? Direct realism says perception puts us in direct contact with reality. Direct realism says we perceive reality the way reality is in itself. So what we perceive is not illusions, it's not hallucinations. We perceive the world the way the world is. If you see a red tomato in front of you, it is really, really, really red. Most thinkers reject this idea because we know our senses, sometimes they lie to us. Sometimes you're driving on a highway, hot summer day, you see water in front of you. It's not really water, it's your senses. Sometimes you look into the clouds, you see maybe a picture of a person. It's not really a person, it's just your senses creating it. In fact, under stress and pressure, human beings hallucinate. We see things that are not really there. We hear things that are not really there. If I take a glass of water, I put a straw inside of it, notice the straw looks bent. So take a glass of water, you put a straw inside of it, the straw will look bent. Why does it look bent? You know it's not bent. Refraction. But no matter how many times you tell your mind the straw is not really bent, your eyes will still see the straw as bent. So you perceive something, but what you perceive is not really the way the straw is really. So you can come up with a bunch of examples that show us that our senses sometimes they mislead us. So most thinkers reject direct realism, the theory that we see the world the way the world really is. Most thinkers embrace what's called indirect realism. That is, when we perceive the world, we don't really perceive the world the way the world is in itself. What we perceive is a copy of the world. It is a mental, internal representation of the world that we perceive. This idea is based on a distinction between what's called primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary and secondary qualities. Objects have what's called primary qualities. These are the qualities that we could measure using mathematics. For example, size and weight and mass and velocity, extension, mobility, and so forth. Take a book, for example. We all could agree the book is, let's say, 1 pound. So the qualities that we can measure using the rules of mathematics, we call them primary qualities, and everybody can agree on them. Secondary qualities are the qualities that exist because of the interactions of the mind with the world. For example, sounds and smells and feels and colors and tastes. Again, we can agree on the size and the weight of the book. But notice if I ask you what is the color of the book, what is the smell of the book, sometimes we can't agree because we perceive things slightly different. So secondary qualities exist because of the interactions of the mind with the world itself. They wouldn't exist. Let me step back for a moment. Do you think, for example, taste can exist if there's no taste buds? How can there be taste if there's no taste buds? See? Do you think pain can exist if there's no nervous system? No, there's no pain unless the being in question has a nervous system. Notice pain is a sensation. If you say pain can exist unless there are living things, tables don't feel pain, rivers, bottles, they don't feel pain. So you need living things for you to have pain, and pain is a sensation. And this means then you need living things to have sensations. This means if there are no living things, there are no sensations. This means then taste, colors, smells, flavors, they don't exist unless the senses exist. Let me step back. You probably hear a question that goes something like this. If a tree falls in the forest, there was nobody there to see the tree falling, did it make a sound? If a tree falls in the forest, there was nobody there to witness it, did the tree make a sound? Common sense says yes, the tree makes a sound. Direct realism says yeah, the tree makes a sound. But if you think about it, it doesn't make a sound. It can't. Because sound is a relationship between air vibration, air molecules, and the eardrums. The only reason why you can hear me speaking in this room right now is because there's air. If you remove the air, even if I scream and yell, you will never hear anything I say. Never. So when you hear something, it's because the air molecules, they move, and then they're picked up by your eardrums. Then your eardrums transform them into sound. So if a tree falls in the forest, there were no ears of living things there. There's only the vibration of the molecules. They vibrate, they move. But vibration is not sound. It becomes sound only if there are ears there to pick it up and process it into sound. So if there's no taste, no taste buds. So if there's no taste buds, taste doesn't exist. If there are no ears, there's vibration, but there's no sound. If there are no eyes, there are photons, but there are no colors. If there's no nose, there's no smell. So the primary qualities, they really exist. Mass is real, shape is real, size is real. They don't depend on my mind. They don't depend on my senses, or my perception. So what indirect realism says that the smells, the flavors, the tastes, the colors, the sounds, they depend on the senses of living things. If there were no living animals, entities, if there's no life, those things wouldn't exist. So they don't really exist in the world itself. So if you look at this picture of a red tomato, direct realism would say the redness is really outside. It is in the tomato. And direct realism would say no, the redness is in the mind of the person perceiving that tomato. Because again, there's no redness if there are no eyes, the same way if there are no taste buds, there's no taste. This is a strange idea, I know, because the way we usually think about it is that the things we perceive, the colors, the smell, the taste, the flavors, they're really in the objects. This idea says no. Those things exist because our brains interact with objects. The things that are real in the objects are the things we could measure, quantify using mathematics. The size and the weight and the mass and velocity, things like that. But the flavors, the smell, the taste, they exist in the mind of living things. This is why we can agree on size, on weight, on measurement, but we can't agree on colors and smells and tastes. We can agree on quantity, but we cannot agree on quality because they depend on how our senses interact with the world. If this is true, this leads us to something really interesting. This is why you often hear they say dogs don't see colors. It's not entirely true. Dogs see colors, but they don't see all the colors that we see. Dogs have two types of cells in the eyes, only two. And this means all the colors you and I can see, a dog can't see them. Whenever human beings, for example, we see red, if I'm looking at a red rose, a red flower, for the dog it looks yellow. Strange. Whenever I see a red color, a red dress, red flower, red rose, for the dog it looks yellow. Then if I see the blue sky, what do you think the blue sky looks like for the dog? I can't even tell. If it looks red to me, it looks yellow for the dog. Is it really red? Is it really yellow? No. It depends on how the senses are built. This means, let's say you could switch your senses, your eyes and your nose and your ears, with the senses of other animals. You could switch your eyes and nose and ears with dogs or cats or birds or tigers or lions or chickens. If you could switch your senses with 10,000 different animals, the world would appear to you in 10,000 different ways. If you could switch your senses with 10,000 different animals, the world would appear to you in 10,000 different ways. because the way the world appears to you depends on how the senses are structured. Think of it like, let's say, if you go by the beach, you put on blue sunglasses, the world looks blue. If you put on red sunglasses, the world looks yellow. If you put on green sunglasses, whatever sunglasses you put on, the world looks like that. But you could remove the sunglasses. So just like that, this is saying then, our senses, they quickly, it's not conscious, it happens unconsciously, they modify the world. The world we perceive is a world that has been refined, changed, modified by our own senses. If you switch senses, the world will appear differently to you. This is why, again, dogs, even though we have better vision than them, notice, dogs have better sense of smell than us, because their noses are structured differently from our noses. Some animals can see colors we can't see. Some animals can hear things miles away. You and I, we can't, because of the way the senses are built. Then if you were to switch your nose with your dog, then something that is 2-3 miles away, you'd be able to perceive them. If you could switch your eyes with the eyes of an eagle, for example, a tiny needle 1 mile away, you would be able to see it. That's how good their vision is. So there's one wall, but the way you see this wall depends on how the senses are built. So this means what we see is not the real wall. The wall we see is a wall that has been changed, modified, structured, shaped, refined by our senses. Again, change the senses radically, you're going to perceive a different world. So in direct realism, to summarize this, says, we don't really perceive the world the way it really is, the way the world really is. What we perceive is a replica. We have a mental image, an internal representation of the world. It depends on how the senses are built. This leads us to one final thing. This is why some people have what's called synesthesia. Synesthesia is when one of the senses blends into another sense. When one sense mixes with another sense. For example, this will sound strange. There are some people who can taste words. Taste words. We're supposed to hear words, not taste them. Sometimes the senses, they switch their functions, or they blend, they mix with each other. Some people can taste words. Wonder what love tastes like, what music tastes like. Some people can taste music. Yeah. Some people can see music. Some people can feel the pain of other people. If you have a headache, I look at you and I can feel it. Again, the senses, they can blend into each other. Some people sometimes, if they take drugs, this happens to them. But there are people naturally that have this capacity. There are people, say they're driving, they're playing some music. They can actually see the music in front of them. So they can see the music, and some people can taste the music. So if you take, let's say, the word Sandra, for example, or Jennifer. If you take the word Sandra, to me, Sandra looks simple. That's just a word. Some people, each letter in the alphabet has a color for them. Each letter in the alphabet comes with a color for them, or each number in the alphabet comes with a color for them. So the word Sandra may look like the blue sky for them. Mary may look like the sunset for them. Judith, Jennifer, may look like a red rose for them. A triangle, number 3, number 7, each one of them come with a specific color. The word Fritz may look like a rainbow to them. So this means then the way those people experience the world is completely different from you and I. Completely different. It's more vivid, more alive, more rich for these people. Strange, but this is true. So to summarize this, Empiricism says we learn through the senses. If the senses don't work, we cannot learn anything. We cannot know. No matter how beautiful, sublime, divine an idea is, ultimately, the senses are the foundation of all knowledge. If at birth all your senses were turned off, you were blind and deaf, you can't smell or taste and touch, your mind would be like a blank piece of paper. There wouldn't be any ideas in it. Direct realism says we perceive the world the way the world really is. A red tomato in front of you, it's really red. The redness is not in your mind. Most scientists, philosophers reject this idea. Most of them embrace indirect realism. We do not perceive the world the way the world really is. What we perceive is a mental replica of the world. We have an internal representation of the world. But this depends on how the senses are built. So what is really, really real are the things we can measure scientifically using mathematics: size, weight, mass, velocity, shape. This is why we can agree on them. The flavors, the smells, the tastes, the colors, the sounds, they're created when the senses exchange information with the world. If the senses don't exist, there are no colors, there's no taste if there's no taste buds, there are no colors if there's no eyes, there are no sounds if there are no eardrums. Because sounds, flavors, taste, colors, they exist in the brain, in the mind of living things. But different animals with different senses, they experience the world differently. So again, if you could switch your nose with your dog, you would smell things way better. If you could switch your eyes with your dog, your vision would become less better, would be worse. So if you could switch your senses with, say, 10,000 different animals, the world would appear to you in 10,000 different ways. Strange as it is, this is the view that the scientists and most philosophers agree with. Right? Thank you for watching.